It all started in the summer of '96, and a strong wind had toppled the young bamboo shoots. A group of 4 or 5-year-old kids widened their eyes, staring at the little hailstones falling from the sky. "They're like popsicles. You can eat them," someone exclaimed. Teacher Zhao was busy changing a boy's pants in the corner. The boy's eyes were empty, staring silently at the yellow urine staining his pants and pooling beneath his wheelchair. Outside the classroom, some unruly children were trying to eat the hailstones. Worried someone might get hurt, Teacher Zhao left the little boy half-dressed to bring the kids back inside. When they came into the classroom, one of the kids caught a whiff of the urine smell. He wrinkled his nose and turned around. Pei Chuan, sitting in his wheelchair, was struggling to pull up his pants. But with nothing below his knees, he had no leverage. After a long struggle, he barely managed to pull the urine-soaked pants halfway up. Chen Hu glanced at the puddle on the floor and shouted in his sharp, childish voice, "Look!" Pei Chuan peed her pants. "It's everywhere." The boys in the classroom turned to look, covering their mouths as they giggled. "I stopped wetting my pants when I was 3. My mom says people who wet their pants are dirty." Pei Chuan's pale, thin face flushed with humiliation. He bit his lip and yanked a picture book down to cover the wet floor. He was trembling, large tears rolling down his cheeks. "It wasn't on purpose. I didn't mean to." The children's innocent chatter grew louder. "Pei Chuan doesn't have legs, and he wets his pants. Let's not play with him anymore. If we play with him, we'll start wetting our pants too." Their noisy whispers eventually woke up a feverish little girl sitting in the front row. Her cheeks were flushed, and her long eyelashes fluttered as she slowly opened her watery eyes, blinking drowsily at the scene before her. Her breath was hot and labored, this fragile, youthful body had no strength. She distinctly remembered dying, so why were countless voices behind her calling out Pei Chuan's name? Bei Yao turned her head in disbelief, her breath catching. The faded images from her memory shattered like fragments of time and suddenly became vivid again. Back then, Teacher Zhao was only 26, exuding the gentle energy of a young female teacher. Through the crowd, Bei Yao could only catch a glimpse of the large wheels of the wheelchair and the stiff figure of a small child sitting on it. Even with just one glance, Bei Yao was absolutely certain that this was the young Pei Chuan. A 5-year-old boy, unable to control his body due to his recent amputation, had wet his pants in front of the class. This scene had faded from everyone's memory over time, replaced instead by the image of Pei Chuan 18 years later, a brilliant, cold, and relentless computer genius. He was the man who had pulled her out of the living hell of the Hua family during her darkest and most desperate days, protecting her for 2 whole years. She had once thought to herself that if she could live her life over, she would stay far away from him. Perhaps she would dedicate herself to honoring her parents and live a life completely unrelated to Pei Chuan. That is, as long as he hadn't left such an indelible mark on her life before her death. But now, he was just a fragile child who had just lost his legs. The classroom was in chaos, with parents rushing in to pick up their children as the hailstorm raged outside. Bei Yao's mother, Zhao Zilan, arrived hurriedly with an umbrella. In 1996, Zhao Zilan was still young, her eyes free of wrinkles, her short-sleeved blouse neat and brimming with vitality. Bei Yao shifted her gaze from Pei Chuan to her mother, watching as Zhao Zilan bustled in. Her eyes instantly welled up with tears. Zhao Zilan scooped her up in her arms, exclaiming, "Oh, my troublesome girl, why are you crying? Did the hail scare you?" Bei Yao shook her head, lying on her mother's back as she glanced at Pei Chuan. His mom was a surgeon, often tied up in surgeries that lasted late into the night, while his dad, a captain in the criminal investigation team, was equally busy with work. Tonight's sudden cold snap made it the chilliest summer night. In her previous life, Pei Chuan had waited for a long time, but no one in the world had come to pick up him. The next day, when Zhao Zilan placed Bei Yao, who was feverish, into Teacher Zhao's care. Bei Yao peered into the classroom. The kids were playing Drop the Handkerchief, clapping and singing, everyone joining in, except for one. Pei Chuan turned his head and locked eyes with Bei Yao. His gaze was empty, devoid of emotion. Bei Yao's heart skipped a beat. In her previous life, she hadn't attended kindergarten on that day. But from the following day onward, Peichuan stopped speaking altogether and refused to return to kindergarten. He became a completely silent and withdrawn boy. What had he gone through, she wondered. Desperate to know, and despite running a high fever, she begged her mother to take her to kindergarten. The song carried on. Chen-hu, a chubby little boy, tossed the handkerchief behind Peichuan. At that moment, Teacher Zhao had stepped out to take another child with a stomachache to the restroom. The room suddenly fell silent. Even kids were sensitive enough to know that Peichuan didn't have legs, he wouldn't be able to tag anyone. Peichuan looked back, lowering his eyes to the handkerchief behind him. Chen-hu made a smug face at him, and the children burst into giggles at the scene. Little Peichuan gritted his teeth, one hand gripping the low wheelchair as he struggled to lean forward. Bei Yao's heart raced. Don't pick it up. Don't. Peichuan bit down hard on his lip and struggled to pick up the handkerchief. His eyes were dark and heavy, like a sinking abyss. Amid the children's laughter, his thin arms strained to move the wheelchair forward. But at just 5 years old, having recently lost his legs, he wasn't familiar with the wheelchair. Each push was like a snail crawling forward. Chen-hu deliberately ran slowly, clutching his stomach as he laughed. Peichuan veered off course, unable to control the wheelchair's direction or apply enough strength. Bei Yao stared blankly, her childlike mind trying to process everything. As she grew older, she knew she'd forget much of her childhood. In her memories, Peichuan had always been a boy without legs, a broken figure, but that was all. If not for the fact that he had once protected her without emotion, even while he became a devil, she might never have paid much attention to him in this second life. To the world, Peichuan was nothing. But to Bei Yao, he was her benefactor, a boy who had silently and wholeheartedly cared for her his entire life. She realized she had to do something to help Peichuan. When Chen-hu hopped and laughed his way back around, Bei Yao clumsily turned and grabbed hold of his leg. Bei Yao! Let go! What are you doing? Chen-hu shouted, flailing his chubby limbs. He tried to shake her off, but couldn't break free. Frustrated, he started bawling. Bei Yao froze, wide-eyed, staring at the crying boy. Then she turned her gaze toward Peichuan, who was still some distance away. Why hadn't he come to tag Chen-hu yet? Now she'd gone and made Chen-hu cry. What was she supposed to do? Peichuan, watching the chaos, silently tossed the handkerchief onto the ground. Without a word or a glance back, he pushed his wheelchair toward the door, his movements labored and slow. The handkerchief landed right in front of Bei Yao as she continued to hold on to Chen-hu, unsure whether to let go. Chen-hu's wailing grew louder, setting off a chain reaction of tears from the younger children in the class. When Teacher Zhao returned and stepped into the scene, she was met with chaos, a sobbing Chen-hu, several other crying kids, and Bei Yao, still latched onto Chen-hu's leg. Quickly, she picked Bei Yao up and tried to calm the room down. Peichuan stared at the door. It was already the second afternoon, but his parents still hadn't come for him. Behind him, chaos raged on, but Peichuan didn't look back, not even once. Although he never spoke, he understood many things. For example, it was well known in the kindergarten that the most popular kids were Chen-hu and Fang Minjun. Chen-hu was funny and always led the others in play, while Fang Minjun was beautiful, always dressed in delicate and pretty outfits. Then there was the bright-eyed little girl who had just looked at him, it was Bei Yao, the youngest in the kindergarten. She lived in the same neighborhood as Peichuan. She was a crybaby, fragile, and prone to illness. Everyone called her by her nickname, Yao Yao. As school ended, parents trickled in to pick up their kids. Chen-hu, as careless as ever, shouted loudly at Peichuan on his way out, "Your dad's not coming to get you." Peichuan lifted his gaze. His dark, deep eyes silently locked on Chen-hu. His pale fingers tightened on the wheelchair, but the pudgy boy dashed off without another word. Bei Yao, furious at Chen-hu's cruelty, grabbed a paper airplane and toddled over to Peichuan. In her soft, childish voice, she said, "My name is Bei Yao. I live close by. Let's play together, okay?" Peichuan's expression remained cold. Without warning, he flung the paper airplane away. "Go away. I don't want it." What Pei Chuan forgot, however, was that it was just a paper airplane. A gentle breeze carried it far away, landing beneath the plum tree in the courtyard. Bei Yao ran after it, her short legs wobbling as she chased it down. She picked it up and carefully placed it back on Pei Chuan's wheelchair. The light in her eyes hadn't dimmed in the slightest. Pei Chuan felt a surge of anger in his heart. He didn't know why, but his face stayed emotionless as he ripped up the paper airplane. He thought Bei Yao would start crying, just like Chen Hu, wailing loudly and tattling to the teacher. But Bei Yao understood that all wounded souls were like hedgehogs, bristling with spikes, but still soft inside. In her innocent, 4-year-old voice, Bei Yao asked, "If you don't want to play anymore, how about we go home? My mom didn't come to pick me up either. Let's go home together, okay?" Pei Chuan didn't reply. When Bei Yao reached out to touch his wheelchair, Pei Chuan suddenly raised his hand and smacked the back of Bei Yao's hand hard. The sharp slap echoed, and Bei Yao's soft hand immediately turned red. Bei Yao sighed inwardly. Pei Chuan was really difficult to get along with. Still, before she could say anything else, Zhao Zilan's figure appeared at the kindergarten door. Zhao Zilan picked up Bei Yao and greeted Teacher Zhao. As they passed Pei Chuan, Zhao Zilan hesitated for a moment. "Pei Chuan, Aunt Zhao can take you home." Pei Chuan lowered his head, his fingers gripping the seam of his wheelchair tightly. Teacher Zhao, sensing the awkwardness, forced a smile. "Bei Yao's mom, you should go ahead." With no other choice, Zhao Zilan carried Bei Yao and left. Sigh. What kind of karma do his parents owe for Pei Chuan to have grown so withdrawn? Zhao Zilan thought. After the mother and daughter disappeared down the road, Teacher Zhao gently patted Pei Chuan's head with a smile. Pei Chuan didn't move. Following his gaze, Teacher Zhao noticed he was staring at the path where Zhao Zilan and Bei Yao had gone. For a long while, Pei Chuan remained still. Then, he opened his palm, revealing a fragment of the torn paper airplane. He released it into the wind, watching as the small piece floated away. Pei Chuan knew he'd been lying to himself all along. His mom would come to pick him up. Or at least, that's what he wanted to believe. After dinner, Bei Yao opened her bedroom window. While Zhao Zilan was preoccupied washing dishes, Bei Yao climbed onto a stool and peeked outside. The lights were on in the apartment on the 4th floor across the way, Pei Chuan's home. Seeing that someone was home there, she finally let out a breath of relief. That meant Pei Chuan must have been picked up and brought back home. But just as she felt reassured, a burning sensation suddenly spread across her forehead. What terrified her even more was the gradual haze clouding her memory. Despite the discomfort, she pulled out a practice notebook and pencil. She wanted to write everything down before her memory disappeared completely. 2010, she wrote. In that year, Bei Yao married Huasu. Only after their wedding did she realize that Huasu had someone he truly loved. Bei Yao, on the other hand, was nothing more than a shield, a tool he used to protect his beloved from the pressures of his family. Huasu came from a powerful and affluent lineage, being the offspring of military and business elites. In their efforts to free Bei Yao from the oppressive cage of the Hua family, Zhao Zilan and Bei Lizai worked tirelessly, going everywhere to beg for help. Tragically, an accident left Bei Lizai in a vegetative state. Standing as an observer to her own life, Bei Yao penned these words with trembling hands. By the time she finished, she was drenched in cold sweat. Still, she knew she had to continue. In the end, Zhao Zilan sought the help of a man named Pei Chuan, a figure the world had labeled a devil. Pei Chuan had developed programs capable of disrupting societal stability, and that reputation made him a feared and controversial figure. Pei Chuan stayed by her side for 2 years, enduring hardship to protect her. On the day she died, Pei Chuan confessed to her, "You are the one I've loved my whole life, but never dared to admit it." 2014, she wrote. By that year, Bei Yao had become nothing but a pitiful scapegoat in Huasu's life. She wrote one final plea in her notebook, "Be good to Pei Chuan." In her previous life, Pei Chuan had refused to return to kindergarten after what happened today. From then on, he stopped speaking entirely. The once vocal little boy, who had lost both legs at the age of 5, never spoke to his peers again. At first, they still called him Pei Chuan. Later, they simply referred to him as the mute. The sun shone brightly today, and the children at kindergarten were happily chasing a white butterfly fluttering over the grass. In a quiet corner, Peichuan watched coldly. Amid the innocent laughter, his gaze fell on the empty seat in the front row, a spot that belonged to Bei Yao. She was supposed to come to school, but she didn't. Days later, Bei Yao, trapped in her 4-year-old body, struggled to reconcile with the memories of her previous life. Her young body rejected these recollections so fiercely that she fell seriously ill. After recovering, her memories only extended to 3rd grade in her past life. Even so, she vaguely understood 2 things: she had been reborn, and she must be kind to Peichuan. Bei Yao noticed Peichuan. He looked even thinner than he had a few days ago. Determined, she walked toward him, clutching a flower she wanted to give him. However, a chubby hand reached out, snatching the biscuit in front of Peichuan before she could act. Peichuan's head snapped up, his face expressionless as he glared at Chen Hu. Swallowing nervously, Chen Hu raised a fist and taunted, "What's the big deal? You don't eat them anyway, so why not let me have it? Not like you can stop me." Fang Minjun, with a haughtiness unusual for her age, sneered. "His biscuits are dirty, Chen Hu. Don't eat them." Lida agreed, "That's right." Peichuan wets his pants. "His biscuits must be filthy." Humiliated, Chen Hu's expression darkened. He tossed the biscuit back toward Peichuan dismissively, deciding it wasn't worth it. The cream-filled biscuit missed its mark, grazed the edge of the table, and fell next to Peichuan's wheelchair. Peichuan's pale hand gripped the wheelchair tightly as he wheeled himself toward Chen Hu. With a swift tug, he grabbed Chen Hu by the collar and pulled him close. Chen Hu froze for a moment, stunned. "Mute, what do you think you're doing?" he stammered. Chen Hu was stocky and strong, not one to back down easily. He shoved Peichuan, making the frail boy's chest jolt backward. Peichuan's eyes were dark and filled with silent fury. Without hesitation, he grabbed Chen Hu's arm and bit down hard. The pain made Chen Hu cry out instantly. The commotion caught the teacher's attention, who rushed over to separate the children. The kindergarten was in chaos. Chen Hu cried and hit Peichuan's head while Peichuan clung to him like a machine without pain, biting down even harder. Bei Yao glanced over. Though his eyes were shut tight, Peichuan refused to loosen his grip, as if determined to bite off a piece of the chubby boy's flesh. Teacher Xiao Zhao gently patted Peichuan's head. "Xiao Chuan, let go, okay? The teacher is here." Slowly, Peichuan opened his eyes and reluctantly released his bite. A deep set of teeth marks oozing blood was left on Chen Hu's arm. Chen Hu cried uncontrollably in the teacher's arms. "Come, Xiao Hu," she cooed, "let me take you outside." Bei Yao puffed up her tiny chest, waddled over to Peichuan, and placed a lotus flower in his lap. "This is for you," she said softly. Mimicking teacher Xiao Zhao, who patted Chen Hu's back and comforted him by saying, "It doesn't hurt, it doesn't hurt," Bei Yao turned to Peichuan as well. She lightly patted his small arm and repeated in a babyish voice, "It doesn't hurt, it doesn't hurt." Peichuan looked at the lotus flower for a moment before placing it on the table. Gently, he pushed her little hand away and wheeled himself to a corner, away from her. The boy who played closest with Chen Hu, Li De, suddenly shouted, "Peichuan is a little dog." A chorus of children nodded in agreement. "And he wets himself. His pants are so gross. Bei Yao, don't play with him." Bei Yao frowned, her face unusually serious. She shook her head firmly. "He's not a little dog. His name is Peichuan. My mom says Chuan means a river, and rivers are very clean. They aren't dirty." Peichuan lowered his eyes. Bei Yao's voice was clear and crisp, like a string of wind chimes. In truth, Peichuan wasn't dirty. He had long learned to dress himself and diligently washed his hands 3 times after using the restroom. His father had named him Chuan, inspired by the phrase, "The sea embraces all rivers." Peichuan didn't understand the deeper meaning, but he knew it was a good name. Yet it seemed that losing his legs had turned him into something dirty, as if even the best name was meaningless when his legs had lost their spirit. Chen Hu's parents arrived first, both storming into the scene. With eyes as wide as saucers, his mother jabbed a finger toward Pei Chuan and barked, "You little punk. If anything happens to my Xiaohu, I'll beat you to death." Teacher Xiao Zhao stood awkwardly to the side, repeatedly apologizing. "I'm so sorry. It's our fault for not watching the children closely. Please, take Xiaohu to get checked out right away." About half an hour later, Pei Chuan's mother, Jiang Wenwan, showed up. Her features were delicate, and her hair was neatly tied back, giving her a clean and capable appearance. On her way over, she had already heard about the incident from teacher Xiao Zhao. Arriving in the classroom, she silently walked over to Pei Chuan, smiled at him, and bent down to gently stroke his head. Bei Yao saw the quiet little boy's eyes slowly light up, and then, in a raspy, soft voice, he murmured, "Mom, I'm sorry." Though Pei Chuan didn't speak much, he wasn't mute. He simply spoke sparingly. But when would Pei Chuan finally be willing to open up to her? Jiang Wenwan took Pei Chuan home and washed his face. "Why did you bite Chenhu, Xiao Chuan?" she asked softly. Pei Chuan lowered his lashes and muttered, "He stole my biscuit." Jiang Wenwan frowned. She knew her son was lying. There were plenty of biscuits and chocolates at home, he wouldn't have fought over a single biscuit. Gently, she pulled him into a hug and smiled. "Mom is going to cook dinner. It'll be ready soon. Is there anything you'd like to eat?" she asked. Pei Chuan shook his head, his dark eyes quietly and obediently watching his mother as she busied herself in the kitchen. Pei Haobin came home later that evening. Lately, he'd been working on a case to apprehend a drug dealer, often staying out until late at night. When he walked through the door, the entire house fell into momentary silence. It was Pei Haobin who broke it first. "I'm home," he said, his tone casual. He glanced at his weary wife, before reaching over to tousle his son's hair. Pei Chuan looked up at his father, his clear eyes showing not a trace of resentment. Pei Haobin felt a faint, almost imperceptible ache in his heart. Jiang Wenwan often blamed Pei Haobin for Pei Chuan's suffering. Arguments with her husband broke out every few days. She resented him for bringing danger into their lives because of his job. She hated that his work had provoked retaliation, which ultimately led to their son losing his legs at just 4 years old. When she saw Pei Chuan covered in blood that day, it felt like her heart had been torn apart. And now, she just watched in silence. At 9 p.m., she told Pei Chuan it was time for bed. The little boy tugged at the corner of her shirt. "Mom, I want to take a bath. It's not that hot today. You didn't sweat, and you're not dirty." "How about another day?" she replied. But Pei Chuan's lips trembled slightly. I want to take a bath." Jiang Wenwan frowned but eventually relented and heated some water. Jiang Wenwan helped him undress and carefully placed his frail body into the wooden tub. His dark eyes lowered to his disfigured legs. He didn't say a word. Jiang Wenwan saw them too. It was a sight that struck her to the core, an ache she could hardly bear. But she couldn't let her young son bathe himself. Patiently, she washed him, dried him off, and carried him to bed. Before turning off the lights, she softly reminded him, "If you need to pee, don't hold it in. Tell your teacher or me, okay?" Pei Chuan nodded obediently. "Okay, Mom." "Can you tell me a story?" he asked, his voice small. Jiang Wenwan smiled and was about to say yes when someone knocked on the door. "Dr. Jiang. Dr. Jiang, are you there?" a voice called from outside. Pei Chuan watched as his mother rushed out, and just like every other time, she would not come back. He stared at the empty space for a long time before turning his eyes to the opposite wall. It was where a chalk growth chart used to be, marking his height year by year. Every birthday, his parents would measure him and celebrate his growth. But that was a long time ago. After the accident, Pei Haobin had erased the chart with tears streaming down his face, leaving only a faint, blurry mark behind. Pei Chuan stared at it for a long time before finally closing his eyes. Deep down, he understood. He would never grow tall like his father. A few days later, Teacher Zhao mentioned that Pei Chuan wouldn't be attending kindergarten anymore and would go straight to preschool in September. Bei Yao decided to visit Pei Chuan's house with her mother. Just like in her previous life, she hadn't finished kindergarten. Soon, they knocked on the door, and it was opened by Pei Haobin. "Hello," he greeted. Zhao Jilian smiled understandingly. "I'm Zhao Jilian, nice to meet you. My daughter Yao Yao is classmates with Xiao Chuan, and we came by to deliver a cake." Pei Haobin looked down and saw a little girl with her hair styled into 2 cute buns. Bei Yao seemed shy but, under her mother's gentle nudge, softly called out, "Uncle." Her sweet, timid voice melted Pei Haobin's heart just a little. "Xiao Chuan is in his room, Yao Yao. You can go see him," Pei Haobin said. Then, turning to Zhao Jilian, he added, "Please come in and sit if you don't mind. I'll pour you some water." No need. We're just dropping off the cake." "Officer Pei, don't let us keep you," Zhao Jilian replied politely. Bei Yao, following her mother's lead, carefully held the cake and followed Pei Haobin as he led her to Pei Chuan's room. Pei Haobin pushed open the door to reveal a small boy sitting upright at his desk, quietly writing. When Bei Yao entered, holding a cake about the size of half an adult's palm, Pei Chuan looked up at her. For a moment, Bei Yao didn't know if she should smile, but with a slight hesitation, she walked closer, both hands lifting the cake high. "Today was Fang Minjun's birthday, so we got cake in class," Bei Yao said, her voice soft. "Pei Chuan, this is for you." Pei Chuan looked at her in silence. She was a girl who didn't let setbacks deter her. The first time, she had given him a paper airplane, but he had torn it and even smacked her hand. The second time, it was the brightest lotus flower of the summer, which he had thrown on his desk without a second glance. And now, it was a cake. She still seemed so small, more than a year younger than him. She'd likely stay in kindergarten for another year, while he would head to preschool next month. It might be a very long time before they'd see each other again. Pei Chuan slowly reached out and took the carefully offered cake from her hands. Bei Yao was overjoyed. Her round little face, pink and soft, lit up as she turned to leave. But before she could take a step, someone tugged at the collar of her shirt, pulling her back slightly. She froze, remembering how Pei Chuan had pulled Chen Hu that day, biting him and not letting go. Instinctively, she nearly moved to shield her arm, fearing he might bite her as well. Instead, the quiet boy placed a handful of chocolates into her small pocket and released her collar, motioning for her to go. Bei Yao glanced down at the sharp-edged candies in her pocket and then up at him. He still didn't say a word to her. Bei Yao ran over to Zhao Jilian, opening her small hand to show her the chocolates in her palm. Zhao Jilian took one and inspected it closely. "That boy gave these to you? These are expensive. The red packaged Kishiling chocolates are from Tichy, they cost a fortune." Looking at her daughter's innocent, adorable face, Zhao Jilian's heart softened. "Since you've accepted them, keep them. From now on, whenever Mom makes something, you can bring some to Xiao Chuan." Bei Yao nodded enthusiastically, beaming. "Mom, you eat some too." "I don't eat sweets," Zhao Jilian replied, laughing. "Then for Dad," Bei Yao suggested. "Your dad doesn't want you eating too much either," Zhao Jilian said, tapping her daughter's nose. The chocolate was infused with an alkaloid said to bring happiness. Bei Yao bit into one with her tiny white teeth, letting it melt in her mouth. Her eyes sparkled with delight as the sweet flavor spread. She only ate one piece, saving the rest. She tucked them into her pocket, planning to savor them when she craved a treat later. Time flew by, and soon it was mid-August. On August 17th, Bei Yao turned 4. Her birthday was simple, a small bag of candies and an egg boiled in sweet syrup. After eating, she headed off to kindergarten as usual. Her classmates sang her a birthday song in their childish voices, but Bei Yao felt a twinge of sadness as she glanced at the empty spot in the corner. Xiang Tongtong said, "I'm going to preschool this year." Several younger kids looked at her with envy. Chen Hu, being a bit older, was also among the kids preparing to attend preschool. He asked Fang Minjun, "Minjun, are you going too?" Fang Minjun shook her head. "No, my mom says I'm still too young." Chen Hu retorted, "Even that mute kid is going, and I'm definitely going to beat her up." Bei Yao glanced at the chubby Chen Hu furrowed her brow. She knew she had another year of kindergarten ahead of her and would remain a grade below Pei Chuan. But if Pei Chuan's class was full of kids like Chen Hu, would he ever have any friends? Back at home, Beiyao asked Zhao Jilian, "Mom, can I have a birthday wish?" Her bright eyes sparkled, and lately, she had been more obedient than ever, as if turning 4 had made her more sensible. Zhao Jilian nodded, "Let's hear it." "I want to go to preschool," Beiyao declared. Zhao Jilian dismissed the idea without hesitation. "No, you just turned 4. You'll go when you're 5. You can't try to fly before you've learned to walk. The older kids are going to learn to write. You should stay in kindergarten and play games with your friends." "I won't play games. I want to learn to write," Beiyao insisted earnestly. Even Bei Lizai chimed in against the idea. "Yao Yao, be good. Falling behind at the starting line doesn't mean you'll lose later." Despite being rejected, Beiyao didn't give up. She went to her room and returned with her practice book filled with square grid characters to show her parents. When Zhao Jilian looked at it, she was stunned. "This is knowledge for first graders, how do you know this?" Beiyao's heart raced, but before Zhao Jilian could say more, Bei Lizai laughed heartily. "Our Yao Yao is a little genius." Beiyao knew her dad wasn't as sharp as her mom, so she only showed them simple things, careful not to arouse Zhao Jilian's suspicion. "What's 2 plus 2, her mother tested her. Beiyao felt a bit guilty. She lowered her head and used her little fingers to count for a moment before shyly holding up 4 soft, chubby fingers. Zhao Jilian looked at the tiny hand beside her daughter's cheek and planted a firm kiss on Beiyao's face. "Alright, let's sign up for preschool. Mom will talk to the teacher tomorrow." When September rolled around, as it always did, the school year began with a rainy day. Jiang Wenwan, worried her child might get wet, dressed him in a raincoat. "Xiao Chuan, you're starting preschool now. If anything happens, remember to find Mrs. Yu." Pei Chuan obediently nodded. Pei Haobin carefully escorted his son, speaking in a deliberately cheerful tone, "Let's go." Pei Chuan held the metal bar on the front of the motorcycle, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. As the light rain powdered on, Pei Chuan slipped out of his mother's sight. The faint smile on his face disappeared. He didn't want to go to preschool, but he knew he had to. This decision had led his parents to finally talk to each other again. Even if his body was no longer whole, Pei Chuan longed for a complete and normal family. At the entrance of Ms. Yu's office, Pei Haobin brought Pei Chuan, who was sitting in a wheelchair. A water bottle hung from the wheelchair, cool water Jiang Wenwan had prepared for Pei Chuan to drink if he got thirsty. The gentle language teacher, Ms. Yu Qian, extended her hand toward him. "Hello, little Pei Chuan. I'm Ms. Yu, and I'm also a friend of your dad. I'll be teaching you and taking good care of you." Pei Chuan's pale, cold fingers lightly gripped Ms. Yu's hand as he gave her a polite smile. Already familiar with Pei Chuan's situation, Ms. Yu turned to Pei Haobin and said, "You can head to work. I'll take good care of the child." Before leaving, Pei Haobin reminded his son, "If you need to use the restroom, just raise your hand and tell the teacher, okay?" Pei Chuan obediently nodded. Ms. Yu encouraged him, "This preschool class is full of new kids. Maybe you'll even see some friends from your old kindergarten." Pei Chuan tugged at the corners of his mouth in a cooperative attempt at a smile, but his eyes remained cold. There wasn't anyone from his past he wanted to meet again. Ms. Yu pushed Pei Chuan's wheelchair into the classroom. As they entered, curious eyes turned their way. With a gentle smile, Ms. Yu helped settle Pei Chuan in the first row by the window, right under the teacher's desk. Behind him sat Chen Hu, who had been fooling around with Li De moments earlier. When Ms. Yu wheeled Pei Chuan in, Chen Hu's eyes widened in surprise. "Well, what do you know, it's really the same class again." Ms. Yu smiled warmly at the students. "Some of our classmates haven't arrived yet, but let's start arranging seats first." Turning her attention back to the group, she added, "Pei Chuan here has an injured leg and will need some extra care. Can I ask which brave and kind little friend would like to share the first desk with him?" Several children hesitated before timidly raising their hands. Ms. Yu seemed pleased by their willingness and then turned to Pei Chuan. "Xiao Chuan, is there someone you'd like to sit with?" Pei Chuan's gaze swept across the classroom. He didn't smile, his eyes remained dull and lifeless, like a shadowed, damp corner where sunlight refused to linger. Slowly, the hands that were raised began to lower one by one under the weight of his cold stare. Behind him, Chen-Hu was whispering to a friend about how Pei-Chuan used to wet his pants and bite people in kindergarten. The other kids' faces lit up with astonishment as their curious glances discreetly shifted to the solitary desk at the front. Pei-Chuan clenched his fists tightly, his gaze drifting outside to the tall sycamore tree beyond the window. Just then, a girl arrived late, her hair styled into 2 small buns tied with pink ribbons. The rain had dampened her hair, leaving her little buns glistening with water. She stood at the door and called out a crisp, "Let me," before stepping inside. Carrying the fresh scent of the world after rain, she walked directly toward Pei-Chuan and sat down beside him without hesitation. "Go away," he said. The first time Pei-Chuan spoke to her, his cold voice told her to leave. "Who needs your pity? Stay away from me." Beiyao put on a pitiful look and said, "But I'm short. If I sit in the back, I can't see the blackboard." Pei-Chuan turned his head silently, no longer insisting she leave. Seeing this, Beiyao beamed with joy. "Who wants to help the teacher hand out the books?" Ms. Yu asked. Many little hands shot up enthusiastically, with the chubby Chen-Hu nearly bouncing out of his seat in excitement. Ms. Yu smiled and picked Chen-Hu, Li Da, and a few other children to help. Chen-Hu's eyes darted around mischievously as he noticed a tattered language textbook with curled corners and dirt smudges. He grabbed it and headed toward the front row. Slapping it down on Pei-Chuan's desk, he sneered inwardly. "Humph, let's see how you like this filthy book." Pei-Chuan's expression remained indifferent. Calmly, he took the dirtiest book, picked up his pencil, and carefully wrote his name on the first page, with perfect posture. Chen-Hu turned to Beiyao. This time, he chose carefully and handed her a brand new, spotless textbook. "Thank you, Chen-Hu," Beiyao said cheerfully. Chen-Hu snorted and moved on to the next student. Beiyao's clothes were poked lightly with a pencil. She turned around and saw a skinny little girl grinning at her. "My name's Anaihui." "What's yours?" the girl asked. "I'm Beiyao," she replied. Anaihui glanced cautiously at Pei-Chuan, sitting next to Beiyao, but didn't dare speak to him. Anaihui's deskmate, a boy with slightly long hair and a few freckles on his face, leaned over curiously to join the conversation. "My name is Gu Xinghua, and I'm 5 years old." No one called out to Pei-Chuan, and he didn't seem to mind. He kept his gaze lowered, quietly flipping through his book. By the time Beiyao had finished making new friends and looked back at him, for some inexplicable reason, Pei-Chuan no longer felt calm. A surge of irritation bubbled up within him, an irrational desire to mess up her neat little flower-shaped hair accessory so she'd stop looking around. At the garment factory, sewing machines clattered rhythmically. Zhao Shou chatted with Zhao Jilian, saying, "Your Yao Yao is only 4 years old. Isn't she too young for preschool? What if she can't keep up?" Zhao Jilian felt a burst of pride, though she concealed it well. After years of knowing Zhao Xiao, she'd learned to wear a facade of modesty. Yao Yao has a knack for studying. She can already solve math problems, and she asked to go to preschool herself, she said with feigned nonchalance. The sewing machine next to her suddenly jerked to a halt, nearly causing Zhao Xiao to prick her finger with the needle. Fang Minjun, who was older than Beiyao by just over half a month, was still playing games in kindergarten. Knowing that Beiyao had already started preschool made Zhao Xiao uneasy. If this kept up, her daughter would always be a step behind Zhao Jilian's girl. That wouldn't do. After school, Pei Haobin picked up his son, passing through the crowded path near the school gate. With his sharp eyes, he spotted little Beiyao standing obediently at the front of the line. Unable to hold back a smile, he said, "So Yao Yao started preschool too? Is she even in your class, Xiaochuan? Let's give her a ride home since it's on our way." Still simmering with unspoken irritation from earlier in class, Pei-Chuan calmly replied, "Let's just go, Dad. Her mom might have already picked her up, and she could get worried if she doesn't see her." Pei Haobin thought his son made a good point, so he revved up his motorcycle and drove off. Pei-Chuan's small face turned slightly, glancing back at Beiyao. She stood there with her big eyes sparkling, waving joyfully at him with all her might. Pei Chuan withdrew his gaze and pressed his lips together, tightly. Following Zhao Shou's request, Fang Minjun was placed in Class 1 of preschool. Teacher Yu Qian frowned as she glanced at the seating chart. The class already had 58 students, and now, with the addition of a colleague's child, there was nowhere to put Fang Minjun without disrupting the arrangement. When Teacher Zheng first heard about the situation, his instinct was to move Pei Chuan to sit alone. Over the past few days, he had noticed Pei Chuan's withdrawn personality. He avoided interacting with his classmates and seemed content in his own world, even ignoring his deskmate, Bei Yao. Pairing Bei Yao with Fang Minjun and having Pei Chuan sit alone felt like a logical solution. After all, it wouldn't seem to affect Pei Chuan's life much. He wasn't close to Bei Yao or anyone else in class. When Teacher Zheng shared his thoughts with Yu Qian, the latter hesitated, her brow furrowing. "I'm not so sure about that," she said. "Children with disabilities are often more sensitive. If we pair Bei Yao with Fang Minjun, how would Pei Chuan feel? It might hurt him deeply." Teacher Yu eventually brought Fang Minjun into the classroom and asked her to introduce herself. "My name is Fang Minjun, and I'm 4 years old. I hope I can get along well with everyone." The words were carefully taught by her father, Fang Xian, and her voice was sweet and clear. Teacher Yu led the class in applause, and the sound was genuine and warm. At 4, Fang Minjun was undeniably beautiful and neat, with an aura that naturally drew attention. For now, she was seated at the first desk near the door, which had been specifically added for her. However, she couldn't hide her disappointment. Everyone else had a deskmate, but she didn't. Being alone at her table felt like a quiet sort of punishment. Preschool wasn't supposed to be like this. Besides, even Pei Chuan, the boy without legs, had a deskmate. Why was she the only one sitting alone? Didn't Pei Chuan always sit by himself before? Fang Minjun sulked, longing for her mom and wanting to go home. But when her gaze landed on Bei Yao's neatly placed school bag in the corner of the classroom, she felt she couldn't leave after all. During the first recess, several kids surrounded Fang Minjun. Some were old preschool friends, while others were drawn to her beauty, comparing her to the elegant Snow White from TV. Being the center of attention soothed her bruised feelings. Meanwhile, Bei Yao carefully took a clean apple out of her bag, holding it like a treasure. She glanced at Pei Chuan. "Pei Chuan, do you want an apple?" she asked softly. He kept his head down, saying nothing. Bei Yao understood his silence as a polite refusal. Cheerfully, she turned to the 2 kids behind her, Anai Hui and Gu Xinghua. "Do you want some?" she asked. Both nodded eagerly. Pei Chuan's small hands clenched into fists, his composure slipping for the first time. His little deskmate tilted her head, earnestly slicing the apple with her tiny knife. Her pigtail ribbon swayed gently as she worked, struggling to cut the fruit. Pei Chuan was upset. He didn't mind Bei Yao eating the apple herself, but sharing it with Anai Hui and Gu Xinghua? That uncontrollable wave of frustration rose again, overwhelming him. Just as Bei Yao was dividing the apple, Chen Hu strolled over. Chubby and bold, the boy loved food and wasn't shy about asking for it. "Bei Yao, give me some apple," he said with an innocent grin. Bei Yao, ever generous, handed him a piece without hesitation. Biting into the sweet apple, Chen Hu's expression softened into one of exaggerated generosity. "Bei Yao, this new year, I'll take you sparrow hunting." Bei Yao's bright eyes sparkled as she smiled and nodded. Chen Hu hummed a tune as he waddled away, leaving Pei Chuan simmering in quiet anger. Pei Chuan snapped the lead of his pencil. The realization hit him hard. Bei Yao wasn't being kind just to him, she was kind to everyone. He wasn't special to her. All this time, he'd thought otherwise. Frustration churned inside him as he pulled out a pencil and drew a precise line across the wooden desk, marking a 38th parallel from one screw to the other. Bei Yao stared at him, wide-eyed and stunned, gradually realizing that the boy who sat beside her didn't like her. Yu Qian, watching from nearby, frowned. Could Teacher Zheng have been right? Maybe Pei Chuan truly didn't like Bei Yao. Even if they were forced to sit together, would he only end up bullying her? After school, Pei Haobin hadn't yet arrived to pick up Pei Chuan. Yu Qian, seeing an opportunity, bent down to speak with the little boy. "Do you not want to sit with Bei Yao anymore?" she asked gently. Pei Chuan lifted his face, his dark eyes unwavering and pure, like the deep black of a glass marble. He said nothing. Yu Qian sighed and decided to be straightforward. "The teacher just wants to know, would you prefer to sit alone, or would you rather sit with Fang Minjin or Bei Yao?" Pei Chuan's throat felt dry and tight, his lips trembling faintly. His voice, barely audible, broke the silence. "Alone." He tried to stay composed, but he was only 5 years old. The ache in his chest crept to his eyes, threatening tears he struggled to suppress. Bei Yao, meanwhile, felt a deep sadness. Pei Chuan didn't like her, nor the things she gave him,